I would now like to invite on stage Mr. Gautam Banerjee. I can tell his name, I'm sure, but the storytelling that he'll do, that is something surprising, and we need to wait to listen to him. Welcome.
Good afternoon. It's always an enterprising situation for a speaker after lunch. And I chose to speak like this. And now, with about 15 minutes in hand, and with a wonderful audience like this, I'd like to do as much justice possible to the storytelling session. Why I call this a storytelling session is primarily because these are stories that I've gathered in my career spanning over 4 decades in various fields. And at the end of it, it occurred to me that these were stories that influenced me. And I've seen many of these filtering into our daily life in retail, in consumerism, in products and services that we see. So, gentlemen, here we go with in my experience, there are actually an outer lining of influence and an inner lining of influence. The outer line of influence are various aspects that you pick up in your lifetime, in your work, and as you go down in life. And later on, they form an inner layer of influence. But I can assure you, I don't have too many slides. It's after lunch. I have just about 4 slides and a couple of stories to tell you. So, as we look at the outer layer, the first most important thing I believe is the art of storytelling. Whoever is telling you a story, it could be a figment of imagination, it could be a real story, but it leaves a lasting influence in your mind. So let's look at a story which someone told me many, many years back, and years down the line, I found the meaning of that story. So the story is like this, that somewhere in the North Pacific, here's a ship with sailing with lots of people, and they're on a cruise. Suddenly, there's a huge storm, and that storm is so very severe that it's going to sink the ship any minute. So the captain's running around, people are trying to save, they're launching the boats, and it's absolute chaos. And in a situation like this, what would you do? Look for the end which is nearing you. But here was this 10-year-old boy, very excited and happy with life, playing with his dog, playing with a ball, and they're extremely happy with life. So people got confused. They said, what makes you so very happy? So this boy said, why should we be happy? He said, look, you're going to perish in the icy waters of the Pacific. He says, but why do you think so? He said, look at the ship, look at the weather, look at the sea. So this boy turned around and said, let me tell you one thing. The ship is not going to sink. So people said, why? He said, the ship is not going to sink because the captain of the ship is my father. Now look at that influence. 3 layers of influence. The boy, the role of the captain, and the role of the father eventually brings out the immense value of trust, of confidence. Isn't that something that you look at in today's world? Whatever you're doing, the bottom line is always, always, always trust. And that boy's only influence that the ship is not going to sink made everybody resolve that the ship is not going to sink. We're going to save the ship, and the ship gets saved. That's the story. But that left a very large influence in our mind. And years down the line, I saw in that story the element of trust. Relevance, response, and retrospective. Relevance, why it is relevant. See, somebody goes to buy a car. It's the car that he wanted to buy all his life. And what does he do? He goes to the showroom And the guy sells him the car with several condiments. It's got this feature, it's got vegan leather seats, it's got crash-proof windshield, it's got tires made out of this. Ultimately, when you're buying the car, what happens? The only concern that comes to your mind whenever you're buying an expensive car, the car of your dream, is how powerful is the car? How strong is the car? How fast the car can move? And that brings you to a time of Alexander, or maybe Genghis Khan. When you do an invasion, you do what? You don't come in rockets, you come on horsebacks in those days. And horses were seen as tough, powerful, strong animals. And the symbol of power, influence of power, so much so that in 2024, we are calling it the horsepower. The influence of an animal. It doesn't have to be a human being. It doesn't have to be an inanimate. So it can be an animal. So the relevance, the response to a horsepower defines how powerful the Ferrari is, how powerful that car is. And you say that, look, this is the condiment to a car. I'm sorry, I'm rushing with time. Transactional. So what is transactional in my case of influence? Now look, let's look at another story here. Here is this boy who goes and tells his warden in the hostel, says, look, sir, would you please change my hostel room? So the warden looks at him and says, Shonali, please let me know when I'm getting close. Where is it? Oh, I can see it. Okay. So 8 minutes. So he goes and tells the warden that, look, please change my room. So warden asks him, of course I'll change your room, but tell me, why do you need to change the room? He says, you know what? I have to reach my goal. I have to do this in life. But you know, there are elder boarders who are playing cricket on the corridor. There are other guys who are making fun of me. There are other boys who are playing music very loudly. And they're doing all kinds of things. I'm getting disturbed. So the warden says, wow, this is quite an issue. I will certainly change your room. But before that, you'll have to do a small exercise for me. He says, anything, sir. He said, here is a spoon. Here is a marble. Please make a round of the entire campus and come to me. There will be somebody following you to see that you've not dropped the marble. So this boy goes around the campus absolutely with his attention on the marble and the spoon. The marble doesn't fall. The spoon is in place. He takes a walk, goes around the campus, comes to the warden and says, sir, I've done it. So the warden says, brilliant. Wonderful. You've done a great job. So I will change your hostel room. But before that, let me tell you something. How could you walk with the marble not falling, the spoon not falling off? He said, sir, I was kind of concentrating on that job. It was my goal to do it. He says, do that in life. There will be clutters in influence. Cut them off. If you have a goal set, the marble will not fall. Did you hear people shouting, screaming, talking, pulling your leg? None of that. Why? Because you are concentrating on that marble, the influence of a transactional and a topical situation. I feel like the last over of a cricket match, 5 runs to go, and the scoreboard is ticking away. Systems and semantics and simulations. Look, we are a generation like me and many in the room. We've transitioned from an analog situation to a digital situation. We got the OTT, the telephones, the mobiles. But the content in the analog and the content in the digital, if you really see to the depth of it, there aren't much of difference. A product which was advertised on the digital is no less than the ones that were advertised or talked about in the analog plane. So, to do this, you have to understand that anything that you look at is a transactional or a system that you have followed. And once you've done that, you've arrived at the next platform. So, a small story here. You know why I tell these stories is because I could have shown 25 slides, but I wouldn't have been talking to you from my heart. So I've taken the privilege of doing so. So this man dies and goes up, and he meets the Lord. And the Lord says, welcome. Let me show you your life spent on earth. So the guy goes for a walk, and he says, and the Lord shows him on the sea beach 4 pair of legs. He said, look, those are yours and these are mine. You know those good times you had, the brilliant times, you were doing so well in life. I was walking by you. I was walking, holding your hand, and you're doing so good. Remember the factory you set up, the products you've launched, the customers you enterprised, they're all there. So they walked for a long time, and they suddenly see that 2 footsteps are missing. So Lord says, look, that is the time when you had bad time. You know, your factories were in trouble, you're not keeping good health, your wife was not keeping good health, and so on and so forth. So this guy turned around and said, so when I had good times, you walked by me, and when I had bad times, you deserted me. He said, I haven't deserted you. He said, why? Where are your footsteps? It's mine. He said, watch carefully. Those are my footsteps. And he said, where was I? He said, you were in my laps. I carried you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have reached the good time that's coming up. That's the circle of influence that we have in our days. In anything that we do, as I said, trust, confidence, holding hand, that is a great influencer in our lives. It can be from any segment. And having said all that, that's the outer circle. Let's come to the inner circle. The inner circle is an experience that you have created through your influential journey in the outer circle. And what does that give you? It gives you trust. We've spoken about stories that give you elements of trust. Emotion. You're emotive about things. You're influenced. Your emotions get influenced. You are a part of an emotive situation. An attitude and moments. Because moments can change every time. So I will end up with a small story. There was a tree and about 5 cats were standing under the tree. So one cat was trying to climb up, and the other cats were holding and telling him, don't do it. It's a tough job. How can you climb up? But this cat kept on climbing, but then he fell, but again he tried, and finally he climbed the tree. And why did he do it? He found out that the cat couldn't hear. So in order to do this, you have to set your goals, cut the clutter in, and then the right influence will rightly influence you, and your journey continues. With this, I come to the end of my session. I'm well within time. And this is the last one. In 15 minutes, I could give you just 1 GB. That's my initials of my name. Maybe later on, I'll keep on increasing to 4 or 5 GBs with more time. Thank you very much, Bengal Chamber, for giving me this, this opportunity. To the sponsors, my good friend, Mr. Praveen Hegde, and colleague for several years, Mr. Anup Hoon, my good friend, Mr. Mahesh Motwani, Madam Sharnali, and Oindrila, thank you very much. If you have been with me, thank you very much.